Hi, guys. Welcome to another Monday night study. Tonight, we want to look at the calendar, just kind of brush over it again and see if there's any questions on it. Next week is the spring equinox, which is in Hebrew the Tekufa. And what we're going to see is this is the beginning, according to the Dead Sea Scroll calendar, of the year 5948. So we're getting closer to that last Jubilee period. So let's go ahead and look at this. So basically, um, the Dead Sea Scroll calendar is similar to the Jewish calendar, and we got to compare that to our Gregorian calendar. So on our Gregorian calendar, most of us remember that there are 12 months, January through December, and that there are different days in different months. And the calendars went through a lot of changes. It was really originally done in the way that we know it best by Julian, Emperor Julius Caesar, and this was about 40 to 60 BC. Much later, we have the same system being kept, except they realized that they needed to tweak the leap years a bit. It was in the beginning every 4 years, an extra day, 365 days a year, and then once every 4 years at 366. And that got it off over the centuries. So then they added, I think it was actually two separate rules, but the main one is every 400 years, there's not a leap day every 4 years. So, like when we get to the year 2000, there wouldn't be a leap year. So, that kind of a thing. So, that keeps everything in check. So, we know that very well. And a couple of interesting points about our Gregorian calendar. If you had a leap week, a leap month, a leap day, a leap something, you would normally put that at the end of the year. That makes sense. So a lot of people ask the question, why do we have our leap day at the end of February instead of, why isn't it December 32nd instead of the 28th or 29th of February? And that's interesting because when you go back, we're going to see that originally the spring equinox is the beginning of the year to all of the old calendars, Jewish Dead Sea Scroll calendar also. And what's interesting about it, if you think about that, the spring equinox always occurs on the Gregorian calendar. It's set to do this March 20th. That's always the equinox, so half winter, half spring day. The first full day of spring would be the 21st of March. It's supposed to work that way. 2 to 3 times a century, it might be on the 19th instead of the 20th, like a few hours before the day starts, but almost always it's the 20th. So we have literally in a year 365.2422 days, but you can't have a partial day on a calendar, so all calendars have a leap something. And so the Jewish calendar today is a 354-day calendar. And every 3 years, roughly every 3 years, there's a leap month, a 30-day jump. Whereas every 4 years, we have a day added because we have a 365-day calendar. Now, the Dead Sea Scroll calendar is 364, so one day less than the Gregorian. And what we're going to see is that does some really interesting things. Number one is 364 divided by 7, the number of days in a week, equals 52 evenly. So all years are the same. Makes it very easy to remember things. So, for instance, if I was to ask you New Year's Day, well, that's January 1st. Okay. What day of the week does it fall on? You would answer me, I don't know. It's different every year. Well, on the Dead Sea Scroll calendar, it's always Wednesday. Wednesday is always the first. Passover is the 14th of the first month, which is the 14th of Nisan. That's always on a Tuesday. So these things make it really easy. So when you're reading about Moses or Jesus or someone doing something on a certain day of a month, and then 3 or 5 days later, something happens, you instantly know what day it was, what day of the week it was, if it was on a Sabbath. You just all of a sudden know a lot of things. And those things kind of come at you because we know there's nothing added to scripture. We know there's no filler. If it says this happened on this date and then exactly 3 days later, this happened, it's for a reason. We're supposed to know what that means. And if we have a calendar like the Gregorian, there's no way we would know anything if it was a weekday, a Friday, what it was. So it's interesting in that respect. So everything replicates. And when you start looking at prophecies in the Old and the New Testaments, all of a sudden things pop out at you. And there's quite a few of those. But we want to start off just by looking at some of these things. The most important thing for prophecy standpoints and for us is to look at this and see what year are we in and why. And so we'll go over that a little bit. So let me take you, first let me show you, we have a Dead Sea Scroll calendar website by itself. And many of you have been there. So today is actually the 13th. This probably says March 14th because we're set to Israeli Standard Time. So in Israel, it's Tuesday at 2 o'clock in the morning, Israeli Standard Time. So it's already tomorrow. I'm doing this, it's 7 o'clock on the 13th of March, 2023. But just by going with us, tomorrow, Tuesday, will be March 14th, 2023. That's the Gregorian date. The week, day, and time is going to be the same on both calendars. It's going to be a Tuesday, okay? And currently it's 2 o'clock in the morning in Israel. So the Pharisee date is Adar 21, 5783. So we're getting toward the end of the year, of course, because spring is coming, but Adar 21, 5783. The Dead Sea Scroll date is Adar 24. So we're actually 3 days different somehow, but it's the year 5947. So the study of the calendar is interesting, the days of the year and why is it Adar 24 instead of 21 and things like that. That's one set of subjects, but we want to look mainly at the years. A big question is, why is there 160 some years difference between 5783 and 5947? Well, that's actually answered in some of the old Jewish history books. But basically, we've talked about this before. A lot of the early church fathers and some of the rabbis thought about the Messiah's first coming around the year 4000 and his second coming around the year 6000. So taking that as a mark, if we do the normal Pharisee date, the Messiah is not coming back for over 200 years, give or take, but about 200 years away. And I think most of you guys would agree with me in saying that's probably not accurate. But if we look up here, he's coming back in, again, this will change to 5948 next week. So it will be 5948. So within the next 52 years. That still seems like a long ways off, but 52 is a lot different than 200 and some. So just saying. But how did we get the difference between these? Basically, the way the calendar year works is we're counting up and we start with creation and we go up to today. And it's the year, the abbreviation is AM. And let me just show you the calculation. So today is, we'll go to the 23. So let's just do 22 because that's the year we're still in. So in the year AD 2022 is 5747. We're going from March to March, spring equinox to spring equinox. Why does the Roman calendar start in the middle of winter where there's nothing? Some odd change occurred, but anciently, as we can see, it would have been the spring. So like the 29th of February is our leap day. I don't know if I answered that or not, but basically it's because March is the month, the Roman month in which the spring equinox calls. So if March 20th actually is New Year's, then the last month of the year is February. And of course, that's why we would add our leap day in February, not at the end of January. Another interesting thing about that, just real quick, when we get from January through June and July, some of these things were renamed. So July is named after Julius Caesar. August is named after Augustus Caesar. The names were changed somewhere along the line. But then you look at September, October, November, and December. And if you pick apart their names, they start with sept, oct, nov, and des, which are the Latin equivalents of 7, 8, 9, and 10. So if the last 4 months of our year were 7, 8, 9, and 10, where are 11 and 12? Well, 11 is January, 12 is February, and then we start the new year at the equinox. So it's interesting. You can see in evidences in our calendars that things have changed over the centuries or over the millennia, actually. So anyway, here is last year's calendar. We're still on this one. If we go all the way down to the last month, we're in Adar. And again, this is the March 13th I'm broadcasting on. So that's right here. So it's the 23rd of Adar, or March 13th. And it's AD 2023, which means if the Gregorian calendar was perfect, and it may or may not be, that should mean 2023 years ago this year, Jesus Christ was born. And a lot of people say, well, maybe he's born 2 BC or 4 BC or this or that. And if that's correct, that just means our calendar's off slightly. But that's what it's dated. When we look at the term AD, it means Anno Domini, which is the year of our Lord. So 2023 is supposed to be the time when from Christ's birth to now. Well, when we look at this one, the 5947, it's been 5,947 years, some months and some days, since creation. And so this term here, AM, or this abbreviation, is Anno Mundi, and it simply means the year of the world, so or from creation. And so that's what we're doing. There's lots of different variants on these calendars. For instance, we have Enoch's calendar, slightly different. The Dead Sea Scroll calendar, which is actually in shemitahs, jubilees, onas. We'll get to those in a minute. Years, shemitahs, jubilees, centuries, things like that. Where we have decades and centuries and things like that. So we have those, and then we have the AM count, which is just probably the easiest. Most of us are familiar with just doing, this is Sunday, January 21st, 2023 AD. You know, that's the easiest way for us to do that. So by comparison, this would be Adar 23, 5947 AM. It's probably one of the easiest ways of doing the calendar. But there's all these subgroups of doing it, and then eras, and there's all sorts of different calendars. And sometimes they'll use the AM count, but they'll have AF, which is abbreviated after the flood. There's a whole subset of manuscripts that date from the Exodus. It's 50 years or 200 years from when the Exodus occurred. So there's all sorts of different calendars like that. But we want to focus on the Gregorian, which we all know, and the Dead Sea Scroll calendar. So in this case, what happens is we have, well, that's the AM count. Let me go ahead and flip over and show you a couple of other things. We'll get into the study directly. So questions is, well, first off, the one question we asked, why is it 5948, or will be 5948, and it's 5783 on the modern Jewish calendar? Okay. There is a document, and we have it published in our bookstore, called the Seder Olam. And it is a guy back in the 160s AD who's trying to do a compilation of things. Basically, I did the same thing before I knew that existed. I put together ancient post-flood history, and I kind of put together most of the older dates, and we focused on post-flood history. So from the flood to the Exodus from Egypt, that 792-year time period, how all the countries arose and whose name is what and which sons they came from, that kind of stuff. Well, this guy's doing the same thing back in the 2nd century AD, the 160s, And he's putting this together, and there's a section when he gets talking about Daniel's prophecy from the command to rebuild the temple to the cutting off of Messiah is exactly so many days. And so if you believe that and put that on the calendar, it comes out to the Messiah being or dying for our sins approximately 32 AD. Give or take a couple of years, but that's the range where it ends. And there was this rabbi named Yoshi, according to the Seder Olam, that didn't like that. So he tried to say, well, the prophecy is actually not from the command to rebuild the temple to the death of the Messiah, but the whole prophecy is actually from the destruction of the first temple to the destruction of the second temple, which is not what the prophecy says, but he's trying to do this. And he comes up with what they're saying is a doctored system of subtraction and addition to try to make history fit. And basically, like one of the things he says that Artaxerxes, Cyrus, and Ahasuerus, which is the king with Esther, are actually the same guy. They're just different titles for the same person. They're not proper names, they're titles. And be they titles and or proper names, we know from many, many documents that the captivity period, or the time when the Persians were over the Israelis, were around 200 years. And under Rabbi Yoshi's calculations, it was 25. And so there's a lot of change. So he was immediately scoffed at, and it's like, you're a nut, get away from us. So then, according to the Seder, he comes up with a totally different concept, totally different numbers, and submits his thing again. And of course, he's rejected because that's stupid. But then something happens. You've got the expulsion and all the other things going on. And about 200 years later, there's a man named Hillel who creates what's called the Hillel calendar. And he uses Rabbi Yoshi's calculations. And so now we have this missing 167 years. So that's not a Christian attack on the Jewish calendar. This is what the Seder Olam, which is a Jewish document, says about their calendar. So whether you accept Messiah or not, nothing really matters. The point is, you have a system. A guy wanted to change it for a reason. He was rejected twice, two different theories. And then somehow, somewhere along the lines, his numbers become normal law. And so that's basically what we've had. So that happens in about the 3rd century with Hillel, making what's called the Hillel calendar. So anyway, that's the same Jewish calendar that we have and have had for about 1700 years. Again, that's the one that's a 354-day calendar that actually has a leap month about every 3 years, every 3 to 4 years. And so it's interesting because the book of Jubilees talks about a time when they would go from a straight solar calendar, which is mentioned in Enoch and a lot of the other Dead Sea Scrolls. The book of Jubilees mentions they would switch from a pure solar calendar to a lunar one, or a lunar solar calendar. They'll start following the moon, basically. And this was a perversion of the calendar, according to the document. And it was a prophesied event. And somewhere along the lines, without going into a lot of history, it occurred, because we've had now a lunar calendar system for the last 1700 years. So again, I'm not attacking it or anything. I'm just telling you what the Seder Olam says, what the book of Jubilees says, other Dead Sea Scrolls. And so the Dead Sea Scrolls maintain that there is this unbroken calendar of creation. And we're going to show you the rest of the years. But anyway, so we have historical documents then that tell us why there's 5947 and 5783. Okay, so that's one part of this. But we'll go on then and look at this. Let me show you. I'm going to bring this up. And this is our network where we're trying to put things together, and you're welcome to join it. We'll have lots of conversations and no censorship, or we won't get in trouble for discussing things that we might. So anyway, this is on Mighty Networks, but it seems to be working really well for us. There's about 600 people on here now, so we're doing good. But basically, we have our community home where we talk about stuff, And then down here, we're going to have courses, different ones. And some of these aren't available to the public yet. But this one, the DSS calendar, I just brought it up. Eventually, we'll have all of these lessons and a lot more. But let me just bring this up. First, there's this concept of 7,000-year cycles. So let me bring this up where we can see it easier. So again, we've seen this from the scrolls, from the ancient church fathers, from the ancient Jewish writings, the Talmud, just about everybody. This entire concept that there will be 7,000 years of human history. The last 1,000 years is what the Christians would call a millennial reign. The Messiah will be reigning and ruling physically from earth, from Jerusalem, during that 1,000 years. So we're all interested on the 6,000 years. When does it end? What happens with it? And of course, these guys, the Dead Sea Scrolls, are going to also tell us the Messiah. There's one Messiah with two comings. The first coming of the Messiah occurred one shemitah after the end of the 9th jubilee of the 8th Ona of the second age, which is another one of those nice, really weird ways of saying the calendar system. And so that turns out Gregorian to mean 32 AD is when the Messiah was supposed to die for our sins. So that's mentioned very specifically, very literally in 11Q13, which we're not going to look at tonight, but there's actually, if we back up on that, I think we have under conference videos. If we go in here, we should have this one here, Dead Sea Scroll 11Q13. So if you want to click on that, you can go through and we talk about, show you the scroll and we go through the whole thing. So anyway, so that's pretty nice. But getting back to our Dead Sea Scroll calendar, so this is basically what we have. So there's these 7,000 years, 6,000 years of human history, and they're divided in what's called ages. Okay. So first off, we have, and this is an example they have a round calendar where we have the square one with the little boxes. So it just takes a little bit of getting used to. Basically, if you can see this, looks like you can, this is age 1. So there's 4 ages. And so these sections here are called unas, and they're 500-year periods. So 4 sets, 4 500-year periods is a 2,000-year age. Okay, so this is the first age. So this would start at creation and go over to Abraham, bringing in the nation that would bring in the Messiah. So Abraham's 52 years old at the year 2000. So we have an incredible amount of data on the ages and all the details, and they all agree perfectly, or almost all of them agree perfectly, with Genesis and Kings and Chronicles. Kings and Chronicles have some confusing things. It's just the way it's written. But sometimes you can read it and go, wait a minute, is that 2 or 4? Or, how does that fit? But anyway, this is the first age, okay? So, and what you'll notice here is these are a 500-year periods, and then 4 of them is a 2,000-year period called an age. And then right here, if you can see this, one 500-year period is going to be divided into 10 pieces. And each one of these 10 pieces is a 50-year period called a jubilee. You've probably heard about the year of Jubilee or a Jubilee period, and we're going to see what those are pretty soon. This outer ring represents one Jubilee, and there's a Jubilee year, and then there are 49 years divided into sets of 7 called shemitahs. So it's kind of like we have 10 decades in a century, and we'll see that later, but they have 7 shemitahs plus an extra year in a Jubilee, and then 2 Jubilees in a century. So anyway, this is the age of creation, as it's called, or age of chaos, the first 2,000 years. And then we have what's called the age of Torah, or teaching. And that was from Abraham's time to the first coming of the Messiah. And so again, this is these 4 here. So this would be from the year 2000, 2001, technically, to the year 4000 AM. The year 4000 AM, according to this, would be 75 AD. So we're going to see the Messiah's coming in his range in the beginning of the church and all that stuff in that very last few years of that age. So that's age 2, 2000 to 4000. a.m. or from creation. And then we have what they call the age of grace. And this is significant because I remember in seminary people talking about Paul's talking about the age of grace, the church age, and nobody saw it coming. It was one of the mountain peaks of prophecy, and nobody knew anything about it. And a few weeks ago, we posted in our network, and it's on our church's website too. I go to Calvary Chapel, Johnson County, which is a Calvary Chapel in Olathe, Kansas. So if you guys are in the neighborhood, you can always more than welcome to show up. But anyway, I filled in a few weeks ago, a month or so, and we talked about the Zechariah 3 prophecy, which actually predicts an age of grace. So it's interesting to see that. So everyone knew these things were coming. And if you know the calendar, it's all spelled out. So this age of grace is supposed to be from the Messiah's first coming to the Messiah's second coming. And so this would be, again, 4 unas or 2,000 years period. So it's the year 4001 to the year 6000. Okay, so then we have the last one, which is only 1,000 years. So it's only 2 unas. And it's called the age of the kingdom or the kingdom age. And it's supposed to be the time when the Messiah himself is ruling and reigning from Jerusalem. And so we have a messianic kingdom. Again, the book of Revelation calls it the millennium or the messianic kingdom. So it's called the age of the kingdom here. So those are the ages. So that's from the year 6001 to the year 7000. So people asked, okay, enough. Where are we in here? Well, let's continue and we'll figure this out. So here's just a quote of some of the ancient church fathers that taught the concept of 6,000 years and a millennium. So that's our first little study on the 7,000-year cycle. So these are ages. So as far as the calendar is concerned, just understand that there are 4 ages. The first 3 are 2,000 years apiece. The last one is only 1,000. And we have an age of creation, an age of Torah, an age of grace, and the messianic kingdom when Jesus Christ will be ruling from earth. So those 4, we're awaiting his second coming to start that millennial reign. So that's the whole concept of ages. Now we break it down into years, shemitahs, and jubilees. Okay, and we have this on the Dead Sea Scroll website too, and I'll show you that in a little bit. But I mean the Dead Sea Scroll calendar website. So again, this 50-year period is a jubilee. So here's the way it works. This is year 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. So this is a 7-year period, and it's called a shemitah. So this would be in whatever jubilee we're talking about. This is shemitah number 1. So if we were just 2 years into the jubilee period, for instance, we would just say it's the second year of whatever jubilee because there's been no shemitahs yet. Okay, so let's go down to the second one just to give us an idea. This is the second set of 7, or the second shemitah. Okay, so that comprises years 8 to 14. So say we're 16 years into the jubilee. Well, we'd say that's 1 shemitah in 2 years. So does that make sense? We're in the second shemitah. We might say it's year 2 of the second shemitah. Or we might just say it's been 1 shemitah in 2 years. Same thing. So it depends on how you write it. That's why the calendars get really complicated. And then when you try to translate this from Hebrew into Ge'ez or Aramaic, some sort of Ethiopian version for like Jubilees and Enoch and those things. Stories are the same, but the numbers probably honestly just get garbled. And we've talked about that before. But so this is how it works. So this would be Shemitah number 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. When you get to the end, that would be 49 years. So here's Shemitah 3, years 15 to 21. Shemitah 4 would be years 22 to 28. Shemitah 5, 29 to 35. And then the sixth Shemitah is years 36 to 42. And then Shemitah 7 would be years 43 to 49. So we have 7, sets of seven, or seven shemitahs, which are 49 years. And then outside of the shemitah count, we have a jubilee year, and that's here. And you can see this if you look at the Dead Sea Scroll sundial. And we've showed that before. There's some other videos we have up on it, but we see the same concept. There's the jubilee year and then the 50 count. And so this is how that works. And then we have the jubilee year. Then it all starts over again. So, but just to understand that there's 50 years in a jubilee. There's 7 years in a shemitah. There are seven shemitahs. That's 49 years. 7 times 7 is 49. And then outside of that is a 50th year. And this has gotten garbled in the book of Jubilees, and that's made a lot of people think that a jubilee is, our Bible says it's the 50th year, but a lot of people say, well, it's the first year of the next Shemitah somehow. So in other words, two jubilees, instead of being a full century, they would say it's 98 years. So we're kind of shrinking down like that. And that might be the only problem with the book of Jubilees, except the Jubilees, we can tell it's definitely garbled because it starts at creation and it keeps getting off almost evenly to where it's about 300 years off. Now, if you just take 1 year off every 50 years, going from 49 to 50, you'd only be off about 100 years in 5,000 years. So when they go 300 years off, it can't be just a jubilee year thing. But the thing is, it'll get 300 years off. Then somebody, I guess, started editing it and started getting better and better. So the time we get to the death of Jacob, it's just 1 year different from Genesis. So if it gets that far off and then that far back on, there's some sort of a problem with the translation. But that's how they get that. Sometimes you'll run into people saying it's a 49-year jubilee instead of a 50-year jubilee. But this is very specific on the calendar. And again, when 11Q13, that Dead Sea Scroll, tells you the Messiah is supposed to come and die for our sins, and it is exactly one Shemitah after the 9th Jubilee of the 8th Ona, which is part of the age of Torah, there's no way around that. There's shemitahs that occur after jubilees, and there are years. So, I mean, the whole thing is straightforward. And if you count it as a 50-year period, that comes out to 32 AD is when the Messiah is supposed to come and die for our sins. Again, if you're going to do the 49, it would be something like, 50 years difference. No, not 50. It'd probably be about 20 years difference. So Jesus didn't come in 4 BC, or die in 4 BC. People argue it's anywhere from like 28, 29, 30, 31, 32, 33, something like that. And most people believe 32 or 33 AD. So one of those. But anyway, so that's the way that it works. And we understand that now by understanding the Messiah's death and where they place it on their calendar and how they explain their calendar. So that's the 50th year. So that's the Jubilee counts. So let's go to Jubilees and Onas. So again, this is the first Ona, and it just means period, but it's a 500-year period. So this incorporates years 1 to 500, which are Jubilees 1 to 10. And you can see here the 10 Jubilees in that period, which the first Ona, according to their calculations, if Messiah died in 32 AD, and 32 AD was exactly one Shemitah after the end of the 9th Jubilee of the 8th Ona, right down here, then you can backtrack very easily and plan where that's at. So creation would have been 3925 BC. If you're going to do a 49-year count, it's more like in the 38s somewhere. So we're getting further and further off. So here is on a 2. And you can see this is the second one. So it's year 501 to 1000. So that's second 500-year period. And in here we have these 10 jubilees. Okay. And it's jubilees 11 through 20. And it's the years 3925 to 2926 BC. So we can go on and go through each one of them that way. So here is an example. For instance, we went from 1 all the way up to the 12th Ona. There's 14 total, and they're named that way. There's 1 to 14. So this is the last jubilee of the 12th Ona. And this last jubilee of the 12th Ona is the last jubilee of the age of grace, according to their calendar, which is 5951 to the year 6000, which on our calendar, Gregorian, would be 2026 to 2075, which makes sense. We're getting ready in this March, next week, to start the year 5948. So then we got 49, which is 23 to 24. And then we've got the Jubilee year, which is the 50th year. We have 48 and then 49. And so 2025 to 2026 would be that Jubilee year. It's the Jubilee year of the next to the last Jubilee, period. So that special year that they do special ceremonies in of that 50-year period. So then we begin the last 50-year period of the age of grace, which would be, again, 2026 to 2075. So according to all the prophetic writings they have that seem to be extremely accurate, they're saying that most of the prophecies that we're looking for occur at the end of an age. So for instance, this is this one. So in this particular 50-year period, we should see things like the Iran war with Israel, destruction of Damascus, the Psalm 83 war. We should see the rise of the 10 nations, the fall of the Roman Empire in its complete form. We should see the rise of the Antichrist, if you're here. But I mean, it should happen in this time period. We should have a 7-year tribulation and then a millennial or second coming. So in that, and then this theoretically should be the millennial age. Now, the scripture does say that unless these days be shortened, so that doesn't necessarily mean this is all hinged exactly on 2075 down to the second or anything like that, and it may or may not be. If we had time, we would look at the other ages and we would see a few things. So, for instance, here is the last Jubilee of the age of Torah, and that was right here. So this is the 8th Ona, 9, 10, 11, 12. Yeah, so the 8th Ona. This is the last Jubilee of that time period, which was the year AD 26 to the year AD 75. So in that 50-year time period, we saw Jesus' ministry, Jesus' death, his resurrection, his ascension, the birth of the church, the day of Pentecost, the preaching of Paul and the apostles, and the spread of the age of grace. We saw the destruction of the Jerusalem temple, the closing of the Alexandrian Essene temple, and then the year 75 was the Council of Yavne, where they decided the age of sacrifices is over. And from now on, if you continue to reject Messiah, the only thing that you do is good works and wait for stuff. And so that was pretty much over. Now, even at that being the case, and Jesus born 30 years, before, like 2 BC, more or less, even though that's the case, though, afterwards we have pockets of rebels that try to retake and rebuild Jerusalem and the kingdom. It was obliterated. It was tried to bring back in 132 to 135. We have a guy named Simon Bar Kokhba was able to actually achieve independence, a small Jewish sect or state in the area, and he maintained his independence for over 3 years, mainly because Rome was fighting other wars. And then Rome stepped in and destroyed him. You've probably heard of the Cave of Horrors, which is horrors, horrible cave. And it's in the Dead Sea Scroll Qumran region. And they call it that because instead of finding scrolls or pottery or whatever, they found 13, I think it was, skeletons. Some soldiers, some children. They just died up there because they couldn't do anything else. And then some coins from the time of the Bar Kokhba era, which would be the 130s. So this is like a besiegement of the Bar Kokhba rebels. And that's where Masada comes in and those kind of things. So All that is in this time period before and then after the end of an age. So very, very important for us to see. So if we back up a little more, here's the last jubilee of the age of creation. So, or the first age. So that would be that last jubilee. So here's the first four, and here's the last, if you can see my mouse moving, the last jubilee of that age. And so that would be 1951 to 2000 AM, which is actually 1974 BC to 1926 BC, would be that 50-year period. And so at this point, we have the year 2000, Abraham was 52. So before this, we have the birth of Abraham, or the birth of Abraham. We have the birth of Nimrod. We have Nimrod attacking him. There's a lot of prophecies in history about that time period, actually, from the scrolls. There's even some comments from Noah and the other guys about Nimrod. So anyway, he builds this satanic false system empire, one world government thing, with a false prophet who's named Anuki in his time period. And Abraham didn't want anything to do with it, but it kept coming after him. And finally, he had to destroy this empire, which is not possible for one guy with a handful of people. Abraham had his 418 armed guards, and he takes on an empire. And of course, when he wins, that's proof that God's behind him. So, anyway, all this stuff happens here, but it wasn't until after that year 2000, I think it's like another 100 years, that the complete destruction of the Nimrod empire, the Babylonian empire, that time is completely destroyed. Nimrod is executed, and then all the countries go back to their rightful owners, and the empire dissolves. And so this is a picture of the end times. We have a one world religion and an antichrist, and we as Christians are what's holding this back. A lot of my brothers and sisters are scared of a one world system and the new currency and the new this. And if we all stand up and say, no, thank you, the answer is no, thank you, because there's too many of us. It's just not going to fly if we're going to stand up and bark. I mean, it will not happen, understand? So if that's the case, we hold this back. Now, when the rapture occurs and we're all taken, that allows evil to flourish for 7 years. But then our Lord comes back at the second coming and is able to fix all the problems and start the millennial reign. So, point is, if Abraham did that in his day with God's power, and it started 100 years before the end of the age, or actually with his birth, 52 years before, and goes up to 100 years after, the exact date for the end of the age is concrete, but the prophecies surrounding it are give or take 50 to 100 years. So if we back up here with Jesus coming and the destruction of Jerusalem and Israel being dispersed, that all is part of those set of groups. That's Jesus starts at 2 BC, and even before that, all the history from the scrolls, all that stuff that happened. But Jesus being born at 2 BC, the church age starting in 32, the destruction of the temples in 70 and 73, and then 75, the end of the age. Then Bar Kokhba, another 50, 60 years later. Well, actually, yeah, 30, 40, 50, yeah, 50 some years later. So, in other words, a lot of things before and a lot of things afterwards. So, again, if we back up the last Jubilee of the Age of Grace, that's that 50-year period. Again, 2026 to 2075. But back up, I mean, we have a lot of things going on up to the Balfour Declaration. And even if you kind of ignore that, Israel becomes a nation which begins a series of prophecies that have amazingly occurred. That started in 1948, or you might even go back and say 1917. Then there's the 67 war and the 73 war and the 82 war and all these other things. And then recently, not so much. Sanhedrin's been reestablished, practice sacrifices have been reestablished, lots of things relating with this. People wanting to build a temple, not anything happening yet, but the whole shift in everybody's awareness. is happening, and that started in 48. So that's basically 60, 70, 70 some years earlier. And then we're going another, 50, 60 years for all this stuff to be completed. So again, with this in mind, you couldn't set the date of the destruction of Nimrod's empire at the year 2000. It was quite a bit afterwards. And if you're talking about Abraham, it was a good bit before. With Jesus coming, all of that stuff happened, the vast majority, in the years 40, 50, 60 years before the end of the age. And then here you would assume it's right at the end of the age, but unless those days be shortened. So we can't use this to set dates specifically. There are some dates we can definitely set according to scripture, certain ones, not the rapture or anything, but certain things. But this is just a calendar system that we want to be aware of. So that's the study here on the jubilees and the onas. And so that'll give you an idea. So that's as far as I've kind of got on this. But it's interesting to study also the days of the year and the leap week system. But basically, if we come back to here again, so this is, we'll say 2022. And this is, and with this, let me back up again too. You can come here and type in any number between, okay, a 4-digit year between 1900 and 2100. So if you want to figure out what birthday or a certain event occurred on the different calendars, you can do that. So for this year, again, this is Adar 23, 59:47 a.m., which is March 13th, 2023 AD. So those are those two. So basically, the way this works, and I thought I had, maybe I didn't. Let me exit out of this. I wanted to show you how I thought I had that ready. But let's see here. Okay, maybe I can show you this. Okay, I can this a little bit. It's not actually finished yet, but basically the seasons of the year. We'll get into that just a little bit because we have a little bit of time. But basically, we have the way that it works. And again, this is what I've been showing you is that center set of circles. And this is the outer set of circles, which are the months of the year and the days. But basically, the way this works is you have mid-spring or spring, and that's what we call the equinox, where part of the morning is winter, part of the evening is spring. So at the exact moment of spring is the equinox, and it's sometime during that day. So the next day is the first full day of spring. Okay, and so on this calendar, that's what these things are. And what's going to happen is on the calendar, there are 12 months, and the 12 months are Nisan through Adar. They're named. I'm just using the modern names because anciently they were just numbered 1 to 12. Like we have names for our 12 months, January through December, but we don't name the days unless it's Mother's Day or something special. But it's basically just days 1 to 30 or thereabouts. So anciently it was all just numbers. But what happens is you've got 12 months. Each month is exactly 30 days. It's really easy. But that's a 360-day year. And there's prophecies that talk about the 360 days. And that's how you kind of code or hide things in the scriptures. But we've got 360 days inside the 12 months, 30 days each. But then outside of the month are what we call tekufas, and those are the equinoxes and the solstices, the days that are partially winter, spring, or spring, summer, or summer, fall, or fall, winter. And so that's what these are. So this is the spring equinox. It's called Tekufa Nisan. It's the spring equinox. So the very next, that's this one here. And then the very next day, which is this one right here, is that Wednesday. So that would be the first day of remembrance of that year, which is the New Year's Day. And that is Nisan 1. And so you can see on these calendars the way it works. This is Passover and first fruits and unleavened bread. So these are the holidays. You can look at a calendar and actually see everything instantly. And so we go to mid-spring, and those are always on Sundays because of the way it starts. So in the middle of spring is here, and then here is summer. Summer starts. What I want to bring to your attention is if this is first day of spring, this is Tekufa, spring equinox, this is the summer solstice, and this is exactly mid-spring. What's interesting about it is when you look at Genesis, and it talks about the days of creation, and people ask how this works. According to the scrolls, now I can't verify it because I wasn't there. I'm not 5,900 and some odd years old. But the scrolls, if we just go by what they say, the concept is that God had creation week. First day of creation week was light, and then it goes on to the different things. The fourth day of the week is fourth day of creation is when he created the sun, moon, and the stars. And you can't have a calendar without the sun and the stars anyway. Moon's irrelevant, but you still have to have a something to calculate days, and that requires the sun and moon and stars. And so their concept is that the calendar begins on the fourth day of creation week. And if the 7 days are sacred and they're kept as such, there's 6 days to work and then a day of Sabbath rest, and then the week starts over. If, and I think we can pretty much prove this, if the days of the week have not changed, and we don't have to go back to creation, we just have to see that the Essenes believed they had the correct days. And then we see the Romans making fun of the Jews because they have their own kind of weekly Saturnalia, rest day. Instead of a rest month, they have a rest day. Jews are weird, they made fun of them like that. So that's great because that tells us that they recognized on their calendar which day the Jews took their Sabbaths off. And then the Essenes never said anything about, they've got the dates wrong. And they wouldn't because it's, commonly known. Today on our system, Jews take Friday night and Saturday off as a Shabbat, right? Or a Sabbath. So that's the day on our calendar. Nobody objects to it because that's just the day on our calendar. So same with this. So if they can tell us it's unchanged to their day and it's this day on the Gregorian calendar, and the Gregorian calendar goes up today. Now, there was in the Middle Ages, like in the 1700s, a time when they realized that the leap days were off, so they had to add 11 days, but it didn't change the week. It started off with Tuesday being one day, and then Wednesday, the next day, was actually 11 days later. That's how they did it. So again, the weekdays, the Sabbath cycles are unchanging. So that's really cool because this whole thing is based on a Sabbath cycle. So, but the thing I wanted to make mention to you is when we look at Genesis, then you have the sixth day of creation is when Adam was created. That's the sixth day. And as we call it, that's Friday. So Adam was created on a Friday. Wednesday is the New Year's Day on the calendar. It's the day of the sun, moon, and stars were created. And then we go forward. Well, you can tally up the eras and you get to, in Genesis chapter 7 and 8, it talks about the flood. And it mentions that the flood was in the 600th year of the life of Noah. And in that year, it was on the 17th day of the second month. Well, here's Nisan. This is the first month. And here's Iyar. It's the second month. And if you start with 1 and you go up to 17, it's the mid-spring date. It was a Sunday that year, like it is every year on this calendar. So it was interesting. You've got Sabbaths, you've got Tekufas, first day of spring, Wednesdays, and then on Sundays you have mid-seasonal things. But this is the actual anniversary of Noah's flood. 1,656 years, 1 month, and 17 days after creation. So it's pretty interesting. But let's go on. So we've got, again, here is the summer Tekufa, the Tekufa Tammuz. And don't let that throw you. Tammuz is not a pagan name. The pagans took it and made it into a pagan festival. Tammuz is actually a variant of the word Damuzi. And the Muzi in the Sumerian text was the sixth ruler of the 10 rulers pre-flood. So that means Tammuz or Dumuzi is actually Jared, Enoch's father. And the texts talk about in the days of Jared is when the angels descended, the Genesis 6 account. And again, we've got a lot of history on that too. But it's just interesting. It was such a major thing in their history that they named a month after Jared, but the names changed. So pretty interesting story behind that. But anyway, so again, this is the summer solstice, Tekufa Tammuz. And then you've got the mid-seasonal, midsummer. And then you've got the fall equinox, which is Tekofa Tishrei. So it's the month of Tishrei. Most of us remember Tishrei is when we have the high holidays. Rosh Hashanah, the Yamin Noraim, the Yom Kippur, Day of Atonement, and then the Tabernacles. And so that's actually what these things are, these holidays. So anyway, and then we have mid-fall, which is here. And again, this is interesting too. When the calendars flipped, so ancient Jews following this calendar would have the spring is the New Year's. Modern Jews have their New Year's in Tishrei, so it's in the fall. So everything on the calendars are exactly flipped 6 months. So if the flood occurred mid-spring and then you flip it 6 months, you go to mid-fall. Well, basically, what is mid-fall? We call it Halloween. And Halloween is a remembrance of this destruction of the entire planet because of the evil, witches, goblins, ghouls, that kind of stuff. And so it's an interesting ancient memory of what happened. And it always makes me kind of quietly chuckle when someone would say, I don't believe in any of this religious stuff. Excuse me, now I got to go to Walmart and buy my kids some Halloween costumes. It's like, if you don't believe it, why are you celebrating the day in which it occurred? I don't believe any of this Christian stuff, but I got to go get my kids some Christmas presents and put them under the tree. Okay, well, it's just interesting that everybody does the things. Where did Christmas come from if there wasn't a birth of Christ? Where did Easter come from? Resurrection Sunday, if there wasn't a resurrection? And where did Halloween come from if there wasn't a flood? I mean, these are just ancient memories, ancient proofs, if you will, for that kind of thing. Anyway, then there's the winter solstice, which is called Tekufa Tevet. And then there's midwinter. And then finally, that brings us back to New Year's again, which is Tekufa Nisan. So anyway, this just shows us. So again, the seasons of the year are 4 seasons, spring, summer, fall, and winter, just like what we have. And New Year's is the first day of spring, or actually the first full day of spring is New Year's. So the day after the Tekufa. And so that's always a Wednesday. So it's an amazing calendar. So if we just get this in our mind, the way that it works. So just to recap, we've got a year. 7 years is a shemitah. 7 shemitahs is 49 years, and you tack on 1 year to make a jubilee period, a jubilee year to make a jubilee period. 2 jubilees is a century. And then 10 jubilees is a 500-year period called an una. 4 of those make an age. And there's only 4 ages. That's it. That's all of history until we're no longer human. Messiah came around the year 4000. Abraham and his stuff happened around the year 2000. Second coming will be around the year 6000, and we'll have a millennial reign. So those things are interesting. So just try to memorize years, shemitahs, onas, and jubilees. Jubilees, onas, and then ages. And then for a year cycle, really easy, you've got, starting with tekufas, outside that, it's 12 months. There's never a 13th month. 12 months, 30 days apiece. And at the seasons, there's an extra day, not in any particular month, but outside the months. And there's 4 of them. That makes 364 days in a year, which divide by 52 into sets of exactly 7 days. So the weeks are always the same. So again, if we come back to here and look at this is next week starting. we'll have Tekufa Nisan, which is a Tuesday, of course, and the first day of remembrance, which is New Year's Day for that, is that Wednesday. It happens to be March 22nd this year. And then we go on down Passover, and we have all of these. And you get to mid-spring, which is always a Sunday, and mid-spring was the time of the flood. And then you can calculate the 40 days out, and again, everything's just really, really interesting. So we'll stop there as our study, but this is a brief overview. Now, what we always do in my home is when it comes to Tekufa, we have a Tuesday Bible study, and we study the prophecies and everything, but we will take the Tekufas and just have a potluck. In the Testament, or not Testament, in Jubilees, it talks about Noah commemorating the four Tekufa, and the concept is you're busy with life, but the 4 times a year, and this is way before Christmas, Easter, anything like that. So in the beginning, 4 times a year, you're supposed to take off of work, go back to your family, to a point. And if you can't, you can't. But the basic, it's a holiday. A lot of people take time off and do Christmas, Thanksgiving, 4th of July, things like that, may travel. Sometimes you can, sometimes you can't. But the idea is to come back with your family. And there's 3 focal points: fellowship with your family members and lots of food. It's a fun time. It's a Thanksgiving feast. But the other 2 points are, in the last 3 months, was there any development in any of the prophecies? Did the Messiah come? Did he die for us? We'll kind of know when that happens according to the prophecies, but were there any prophecies fulfilled? What's going on in the prophetic world? And then also repentance. This stuff is real. And you need to be right with the Lord, or you're going to lose rewards. You need to get saved. These things are important. And so these are what you do at Tekufas. Does anyone need to pray, need to repent of their sins? Does anyone need to seek God's guidance on the direction of their lives? Did any prophecies fulfill? If the answer is no on that, we're all good, then let's party. Let's have a big feast. And I'm not talking about getting drunk, but let's have a big feast and continue to fellowship so we don't lose touch with family members. That's what the whole concept's about. So next Tuesday, we will be having, instead of a regular Bible study, our Tekufa potluck. So the Monday before, we will have a broadcast, but instead of doing a regular teaching, we'll just have a Q&A. And we'll kind of go back over this. If you have any questions for the calendar, prophecies, anything, be a good time to do it. Did any prophecies get fulfilled? Did we need to repent? That kind of stuff. So we'll do that next week. Okay, well, now let me flip over to the chat room, and we'll see if there's questions. Looks like there are 7 questions. And it says, how would the dragon, first question, that has 7 heads in Revelation 12, have 10 horns and just 7 crowns, which is different than Revelation 13:1. Don't the crowns give horns authority to rule? Well, yes, but basically what we're talking about is the timing. And so the concept is that the 7 heads of the creature represent the 7 kingdoms, so that ruled over Israel. So there was Nimrod's ancient Babylon, there was Egypt, and then there was Nebuchadnezzar's Babylon, and they were called by the same name, but it was actually totally different kingdoms, different time periods. And then there was the Medo-Persians, and then the Greeks, and then the Romans. And that gets us up to 6. And there's going to be a 7th empire, which is that 10-head empire, is basically the way the prophecies are. So sometime after the end of the Roman Empire, these 10 kingdoms will arise. And in the days of those kings, that's when the Antichrist comes to rule. And we have that 7-year period mentioned in Daniel 9 and other places, the tribulation period. So that's what the 7 heads represent. Now, we're told in Daniel that the process is these 10 kings come together, but they're not very strong because they're too democratic. They can't seem to agree, and nobody can make the other guys do anything. So they're having this problem in ruling and establishing authority. So the Antichrist steps in and says, we're going to do it my way. And apparently seven of the 10 nations agree, but three of them say no, and they rebel against the Antichrist. You're not coming in and taking us over. Well, the Antichrist goes to war with the three and completely wipes them out. Okay, so now they're just subjects by conquering to the Antichrist, whereas the other three submit. So if you can see this on one of the heads, which is that seventh head, not the others, but the one that hasn't come yet, there are these 10 crowns, or excuse me, 10 horns. And so these horns represent those 10 nations. When the Antichrist comes in, he's pictured in Daniel as a little horn, and he uproots three, and he becomes the eighth of the seven. And so that's the symbolism. So in Revelation, when you see this seven-headed red dragon, and on the seventh head, he has these 10 horns, that'd be the 10 nations. And in one place, you see 10 horns with 10 crowns. So that means it's after this kingdom is formed, but before the Antichrist has destroyed it. And the next time you see this head with the 10 horns, and you see 7 crowns on the 10 horns, it means that 3 of those nations have been obliterated. Not the people necessarily, but the governments are destroyed, and the crowns being removed, and the Antichrist in that Antichrist war. So basically, you're seeing this when you see the head with 10 horns and 10 crowns. It's a first. It's the 10 nations in the first half of the tribulation period. And then after the Antichrist takes over, that's the head with the 10 horns and the 7 crowns. So that's basically all it's telling us at that point. It's connecting it to Daniel. We're talking about the same people. But now if it says when they have the 10 crowns, this happens. When they have the 7 crowns, this happens. Then you'll know what part of the tribulation period those events occur in. So, and that's basically what it's talking about. Excellent question, because that gets really confusing. Jesus said, are there not 12 hours in a day? Does that mean he was indicating the significance of the equinox, maybe before the rapture? Well, maybe, but they seem to do the same thing we do. When you're looking at the stuff and studying it and you see something weird, you're like, what in the world? Can't they do it better? And then you think, actually, we do the same thing. We're just as goofy. So if you think about it, when I say we have a 24-hour day, like Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, but then I'll turn right around and say, well, there's a day and a night in a 24-hour period. So wait a minute. There's a day and a night inside of a day. But how is a day and a night inside of a day? There must be two different kinds of days. And there is. There's a 12-hour one and a 24-hour one. Why in the world do we call it that? There's a day and a day. So it's the same kind of thing. I think probably everybody does that, all the different groups. But when he said, are there not 12 hours in a day, he's probably referring to 12 hours in a day, 12 hours at night inside of one day. But as to the whole idea, could he be talking about the equinox? Maybe. I'm not sure how that would plug in exactly, but it's something to look at to kind of see if there is anything. But at the very least, he's just saying that there's 12 hours in a daylight part of a day for you to work. And so the concept is you need to work while you can work, because when it gets dark, you can't work. They didn't have lights and flashlights and stuff, and they're out working in the field trying to hurry up and get the crop in before it rots. And so that's why today you'll even see farmers that they don't do anything else. They don't even go to church during that season, the 2 or 3 weeks. They just have to work as long as there's daylight. Now today we have tractors with headlights, and you can hire people to work all day and all night long, but you couldn't back then. But it's interesting how all those agricultural questions might have a bearing in prophecy. Ezekiel 29 mentions Egypt being destroyed and desolate for 40 years. When do you think the 40 years is, past or future? I'm not really sure. I would assume future because I can't find any manuscript that says that it happened, at a certain point. There are a few theories that it did happen at a certain place. For instance, Egypt was totally obliterated under Moses, but according to the manuscripts, it wasn't a 40-year period until they were back. It actually you don't know the exact date, but you don't see Egypt after the Exodus being talked about as a country that you could trade with or a power or anything like that until about the time of Solomon. So, I mean, you're talking about 400 years to get back where you're a power to be reckoned with. So, the 40 years, unless it's a glitch and it means 400 instead of 40, but I kind of doubt that too. So, I don't really know for sure. That's definitely something to look at because if it is future, and it's before the second coming, it I'm assuming already happened, unless we're like on the calendar, if something like that was to happen 40 years before 75, AD would put us down to basically in the next decade or less. So interesting. Yeah, that's a really good point, but I'm not sure about that. Heard lots of different people have different opinions. Does the Essene calendar date of April 6, 32, being the death of Jesus, account for there being no 0 year when we go from AD to BC? I'm trying to understand why so many people believe 33 AD. Yeah, there's a discrepancy. A lot of us forget to do the 0 year, and I don't know why they do that. It's like this is the year one, and the next year is two, and normally there should be a zero and then a -1. But they don't do that with that. It's like this is the year one going forward, year one and then two and everything. And last year was 1 BC. So there's the problem. Most of the time, and I've said this before, I've said 32 AD and said that the prophecy of Artaxerxes' 20th year was in 444 BC. And some people dated at 444 and others at 445. So depending on which year you date that, it really should be either 32 or 33. But it's interesting that when you start from that and you go forward, you come up to April 6, 32 AD, which was not a Passover if you're looking at a Passover being the new moon, but they wouldn't on this calendar. But April 6, 32 AD would have been Passover. Matter of fact, let me bring up the calendar here just to show you. So this year, or it's April 4th, would be Passover. And let me go back to two because I think this year it was that. April 5th was this year. So it varies because it goes up and down. March 30th. Okay, so let's try 24. Anyway, April 2nd, there you go, 24, 25. Okay, 26. March 30. Ooh, I think that's off. No. Oh, that could be, yeah. 26, 27. Anyway, one of these, it'll Passover, which is 14th, will actually be that. So let's try 20. Maybe it was a 20. But anyway, as you can see, it's April 4th, 5th, or 6th is the last one. And then there's always that leap back, and it goes all the way back to March 30th. So it's sometime in this week before the leap week comes in. So it's interesting that that would date. And that's been a controversial thing, is people said, well, he died on Passover, which should be the full moon. And yet this date, when you do it, it comes out to be April 6, 32 AD. And 32 AD would be a good date, either 32 or 33. But April 6th is nowhere close to a full moon, so it couldn't be his death. And people speculated maybe it was the week before, came in, but this would actually be more like a week after. So that's always been a problem. The prophecy is specific, and it doesn't lie. But what is it pointing to if it's not pointing to the Passover? It seems to be off a week. But then you look at this calendar, and April 6th seems to be the Passover according to this. So it's pretty interesting. But yeah, I think a lot of them get that confused, and I've done that before too. I've said it both ways, but it depends on because in Daniel 9, it's exactly so many days. I think it's 173,000 some odd days from one event to the other. And it depends on if you take Artaxerxes' 20th year, which is when Nehemiah says he got the command to go forward, is that when he actually left, is it 444 or 445? And there's some debate on that. You'll hear the same kind of debate on like Herod. Herod was in 2 BC. No, actually, he would have been 4 BC. So Jesus would have had to have been born in 4 BC instead of 2 BC. And some people say 6. It's just how you're stringing it together. They all can't be right. There's just one document that says it was in so and so's whatever year. Well, apparently one of those is wrong because they can't all be correct. But we're all in that same ballpark, though. Super chat, $50. Thank you very much for the donation. I want to thank all of you that give super chats and donate through Give, Send, Go and other stuff for the ministry. It really helps. And we're going to be able to start going forward here in the next month or so and have more people in the chat room and start doing more studies on the network. This will remain the same, but we're going to try to expand and look at a lot of other things. Do you think that the cycle of ages are related to the 4 wheels in Ezekiel's vision? Oh, that's interesting. The spokes would be off, but it'd be interesting if anyone ever drew the circle instead of it being a perfect cross, if it was more like, you know, the two, the two, the two, and the one. So that would be kind of interesting. Let me see that real quick here. Let me go back to here and go to, yeah, not this one, but this one. Okay. So what I mean is it's not exactly perfectly like this because it's this, this, this. So it'd be like here, 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 and here. So it'd be kind of it'd be interesting to make that and see if it appears anywhere, like in any manuscripts or in any jewelry, that exact figure. It's kind of like an offset star. That would be really interesting to see if there's anything like that. We'll have to definitely do that. Um, that'd be cool if it is. I've often thought about that because the whole idea of they don't turn when they go, but the 4 faces of the cherub in a wheel remind me of Tekufas. So it is interesting. There might be something to that, like an ancient name or something. Have you heard of the 1813 Bible? It says that 2021 was 5998 years. Yeah, it's an interesting, and that again is really close to the Dead Sea Scrolls. They're all a little different back and forth, but it's interesting how we can do that. So the year 6000 should have been, or should be then, in 2024. I think that's interesting that it's, according to these guys, it's exactly one jubilee off. So that's always interesting when it's exactly 7 years or exactly 50 years or something like that. It's kind of makes you wonder. Yeah, so I would think that's much more accurate than like the Septuagint and other things. Wouldn't it be great if this calendar was off by exactly, well, no, I guess it couldn't because we'd already be in the tribulation period. Shoot. Anyway, but still, I'm wanting the rapture to be a little closer than 40 years. But yeah, that's it's interesting. Again, with all of these things, we can't nail it down for sure, but we've got to be in the season. So that's what's interesting about it. Plus all the prophecies that we've seen fulfilled and the ones apparently that are getting close to being fulfilled. Yeah, I've been hearing for several years now that Israel's going to attack Iran any second. And of course, it keeps delaying. So what I'm hearing is not 100% accurate because they're going to have the bomb in the next week. So they got to attack now, but they never do. And they're always going to have the bomb in the next week. And that's been going on for a year or better. So but there's something to it. I mean, the prophecy in Jeremiah 49 talks about Elam being destroyed. And I was talking with my son the other day. It's a really interesting thing because Enoch 56, I think it's 56, talks about that same war where Elam is destroyed. And it seems to indicate it's got something to do with some of the fallen angels being released. Not necessarily the four into the Euphrates, but there were 600, remember? No, 200? I'm glitching. I think it was 200. Yeah, the 200 that came down on Mount Hermon, which was Genesis 6, the ones that were in prison. So, but it seems to indicate that it's got a couple other interesting things to it. So, and it's not the big war. I mean, which would be the Battle of Armageddon. It's not that one. So that's nice. They're two separate wars. Otherwise, it wouldn't happen for at least 7 years. But it looks like it's getting ready to happen here pretty quick. So, I thought we got new bodies after harpazo, dead or alive. We are no longer human then. So, what do we become? Yeah, basically, we're human in basic nature, but we have a glorified body. Paul talks about we're not exactly sure what we would be like, but we know we'll be like Christ. So he was completely human, except without a sin nature. And then after his death, he seems to be able to walk through walls and just appear to people. He can still eat if he wants to, but apparently doesn't need to. So it's just interesting. We don't really know. It'd be like trying to explain to someone else what it's like to be human. I know and you know by experience, but only the glorified people would really know by experience. So, but yeah, but harpazo at the rapture, the dead in Christ rise first, and then we which are alive are caught up also. So we're changed into a glorified form. In Daniel 12, it talks about the glowing ones, the fact that our bodies actually glow, kind of like Jesus did on the Mount of Transfiguration. So pretty interesting. So we're just immortal human beings, but no sin nature. That's going to be fantastic. I'm wondering if the term woman can mean from man or man made in regards to the wind of the scroll that carries the ephod. Oh, okay. In Zechariah 3, or 3, not 3, 5. Anyway, the woman in the ephod. Or there's that one, and then there's the scroll. Yeah. Um, from man made. I'm not sure. I'd have to look it up and see, but the normal word for man in Hebrew is ish, and the word for woman is isha, and a wife would be the same thing. My wife is my woman, and I'm her man. So it's just they're kind of used the same way. So man, woman, husband, wife, but ish and isha. So usually to make something feminine, they just tack an h, an ah on the end. So like par is a bull, para is a cow, things like that. So ish and isha. So I don't know if that could be from. I guess it could in a riddle form though. Normal grammar it wouldn't, but with these riddles you never know. It's just some sort of a clue that you have to put together. So I don't know. Maybe it'd be something interesting if you find out something that seems to fit, or somebody has that idea. I'd be interested in seeing it. Super chat $5. Okay, thank you. Thank you very, very much. I appreciate that. And then let's see. And the woman put in the ephod is software that looks all over the world's transactions. Ooh, that'd be spooky. Um, yeah, I doubt it means that, but it's something to look into. So definite translations. So maybe the whole software system of not being able to buy and sell unless you take a mark would have something to do with that. That's interesting. That'd be interesting to look at. Let's see. I just finished the book of John, and he calls it the Great Sabbath. So in 32 AD could be the two Sabbaths. Could be the two Sabbaths. I'd have to look that up and see. I'm not sure. I don't really remember that. But yeah, he could be referring to the great Sabbath as being the millennial reign, because that's the whole picture it's supposed to be. And let me just real briefly kind of go back to this. So if we go to that would be inner rings, I think. No, Sabbaths. Yeah, I think so. So this is the way it's here. On the website, we have moving graphics. But so here's the concept of the Sabbath. So the whole idea of 6,000 years and then a millennial reign. And so the concept is, and we don't know for sure because each one of the festivals have some sort of a ritual. And if you could look at the ritual, you'd know exactly what we're doing. The Passover ritual, for instance, very clearly shows a death, burial, and resurrection of a Messiah. Um, the Sabbath ritual that they did in the temple, I'm not sure anybody has that. Hopefully it's somewhere, but if we could look at that and the Pentecost ritual and those things, it'd be interesting. But basically, the Sabbath ritual supposedly teaches us about the 6,000 years in the millennial reign. So, yeah, if Jesus calls it the Great Sabbath, I would think he would be referring to the millennial reign. I'll have to look that up. Pretty interesting. It's cool that you guys give me some stuff to look at. Pretty neat. Okay, okay. Um, Super chat. Thank you very much. Have you heard about the 25 20-year cycles that seem to link ancient and modern Israel? Last cycle may apparently end in 2039. There are at least a couple of cycles like that that are definitely correct. And I've got, let me pull it back up. I think I've got these in. Exit out of this one. Back in the conference videos, we've had like this one here, the prophecies of 1948 and 1967. It's about how to do that, and the dates gets down to 2,500 and 20, I guess 2520 days though, and you have to do it right on a calendar system. But as far as if there's a 25-20 year cycle, actual year, I haven't heard of that. But it's an interesting thing here. So there's a couple of those kind of things. Okay, so not anything directly. Okay, so we'll go ahead and end it. Yeah, 8:30. So we'll go ahead and end for tonight. So again, next week we'll come back with just a quick Q&A and talk more about the calendar, that kind of stuff if people are interested or whatever questions you have. So this is exciting. We only have 2 more years left to a jubilee and then the last jubilee. So definitely right about now, some prophecies ought to start being fulfilled. So we'll go ahead and stop there. Thank you guys, and we'll see you next week. God bless.